And so I think that if it's defined that broadly, then that ought to be sufficient for all the Patriot Act powers, more than sufficient. And so you don't need to say, well, Patriot Act also applies to gambling and other things. Because if there's anything that I define as terrorism, more at the core, it's easily captured in that very broad definition. Let me give you an example. It's not having a pro-illegal alien rally is not terrorism under any definition of federal law. But now let's say the people at the rally start throwing bricks through the window of the police department nearby. That could well be terrorism under the broader federal definition. I'd argue that it's not. I'd argue it's a crime. I want those people arrested and put in prison, and if they're illegal aliens, deported as soon as they serve their prison sentence. But that doesn't strike, it is using violence to intimidate a government. But it strikes me as that's not what we needed to rush to pass the Patriot Act for. We're thinking of terrorism in a much more narrow sense. But it's not true that the mere political speech is terrorism under federal law. Certainly political speech where we were trying to incite crimes and terrorism might be, but that's been a principle of law all along. I mean, if you come to my church and I tell you ought to go out and kill people of any religion other than mine, that in some circumstances is just incitement to a crime under very traditional common law definitions.
You actually have to commit the crime. I mean, it's not just telling you. It's not saying that all abortion providers should be killed, but it is actually having you then go out and kill somebody.
But that statement could result in surveillance.
Absolutely.
It could most definitely.
Right, and it sure as hell should.
It could, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that David is right on that point. That's it.
All right.
I think I was going to say something else, but I don't remember.
It'll come back around.
Yeah, it will.
Do we have any questions? Anybody out there have any questions? We have about 15 minutes left in the session. Let's see. Step up. We have two incredibly knowledgeable people on stage.
We sort of took away your questions. I mean, we sort of took away. We just started talking.
No, that's fine. That was. I'm no Tom Brokaw, so.
You're not as dull.
Yes, I was going to say that's right. That's right.
I was going to do an impression, but it's bad. Okay. Green light, yellow light. Well,
here we got a question.
Oh, fantastic. Oh.
Habeas corpus for non-citizens does not exist.
And never did, right?
No, it actually did exist. Habeas corpus is actually written into the Constitution. It's not just in the Bill of Rights. There actually are provisions in the body of the Constitution itself that provides habeas corpus for any person in the United States.
And it says it may not be suspended except during time of war by a vote of Congress.
By a vote of Congress, right.
Yes.
But and that is habeas corpus, though, for non-citizens at this point does not exist. It exists in somewhat limited. Well, let me put the restrictions are not. How am I trying to? I'm trying to say that it also does not exist in some circumstances for citizens. But generally speaking, for citizens, there is still some habeas corpus right remaining.
Well, to what extent do you say it doesn't? Like when somebody files abusive successive petitions, like in a death penalty case?
Well, no. I think that what we've seen, for example, with Jose Padilla. Jose Padilla was an American citizen.
Right.
And he was held without habeas corpus. So in that respect, if you are considered to be a enemy combatant in the United States and you are a citizen, you do not have habeas corpus rights. The problem with the enemy combatant classification now is that the executive branch, the president or his designee, has the power to determine that you are an enemy combatant and detain you. It doesn't matter. You don't get habeas corpus if the executive branch decides on its own, without any kind of a hearing or anything of that nature. If they call an American citizen an enemy combatant, you're gone, and you have no habeas corpus rights. So that could happen to me. It could happen to you. It could happen to David. If the government were to decide for some reason that as citizens we are still enemy combatants, you won't see us here. We'll be like transported, like in Star Trek.
Do you know of any case other than Padilla where something like that happened for an American citizen?
Well, the problem, of course, is that we don't know. I mean, that's a new right. The ability for the president or his designee to define someone, a citizen, as a enemy combatant came out of the Military Commissions Act. So it's new and it's secret, so we don't know about it.
Well, then does he get a hearing before the Military Commission?
We don't know that for sure yet. Supposedly he should. Actually, under the Supreme Court ruling, anyone who is detained should have access to U.S. federal courts in the District of Columbia. But I don't know if that has happened. Well, it certainly hasn't happened for any of the detainees in Guantanamo yet. So I don't think it has happened yet for any American detainees.
Well, no, they got the 17 of them in Guantanamo got out, the Muslim Uyghurs from China.
Yeah, but they had been determined not to be combatants after all. I mean,
right. So they got a hearing, and it was determined they were not combatants.
But that was not in the federal court.
What court did that?
That was
the Military Commission.
Military Commission that determined that. The federal court in D.C. has not yet received any, or not held any hearings yet for any detainees. So yeah, you got it and you don't got it.
You know, the challenge is with this, it's a different kind of war. You know, in World War II, it's pretty clear that it's lawful under the Articles of War. You know, if you capture some German prisoners on the battlefield, you can detain them till the war ends. And that also includes, like, if you capture some guy who, you know, it's just the nature of war is that it doesn't get done with judicial precision. So if there's you pick up 5 German undercover agents, you know, operating in France during the war, and it turns out you got 4 German agents and one guy who was just sort of a shepherd who was friends with him, and, you know, you picked him up by accident. I mean, that's just, you know, that is the tough luck and reality of war. The challenge, of course, is we don't have so, you know, detaining people from the battlefield or from the front has never been an issue, and they, you know, traditionally they have no habeas corpus rights, you know, of course, as they shouldn't.
Right.
And the challenge is when you have a place where the battlefield can be all over the world, you know, and there were a lot of people picked up in Afghanistan in 2001 who were terrorists, and we captured them, and it was great. And there were some other people who got picked up, and hopefully they've all been released now, who, you know, might have just been fingered by some guy who was working with U.S. forces, but it was just a personal enemy or something like that.
They've not been released.
Well, some have and some haven't, and some have been released, you know, back to Great Britain or Saudi Arabia and have gone out and committed more terrorist acts.
But the problem is, though, that if you don't have an end to the war, when do you release them?
Right.
That's what I was going to ask. I read somewhere that it was suspended in 2001, and then it was reinstated by the Supreme Court somewhere in 2003 in, I think it was Yusuf Khalid versus the United States government or something like that. And the Supreme Court reinstated it. Is that also true?
Well, it wasn't formally a suspension because the argument was that Congress would have to vote to suspend, although Lincoln actually suspended habeas corpus on his own during the Civil War.
But he did have it ratified by Congress.
Later. But the argument was that the right of habeas corpus did not